"Sir, you are under arrest for trespassing on your own property," is essentially what the officer was about to say before I presented him with my deed. You see, a certain Karen had been wreaking havoc on our entire lake community for months, summoning the police for anyone who had the audacity to exist without her say-so. She had threatened a $50,000 lawsuit against me, lodged false police reports, and even attempted to bribe county officials to have me evicted from my own land. But here's the best part. She was completely oblivious to the fact that I was the owner of the $800,000 mansion she was leasing. Imagine the sun rising over Lake Serenity, the aroma of pine needles blending with the morning mist. Then, abruptly, the flashing blue lights of a police car dance across the walls of my grandfather's old cabin. Gravel crunches as 2 patrol cars arrive. And there she is, Brenda Carmichael, poised on her mansion's deck in a vibrant pink bathrobe, pointing at me as if I were some notorious criminal. What would you do if someone summoned the police on you for fishing on your own land? Let me know in the comments, where are you all tuning in from? I'd be willing to bet that half of you have your own HOA horror stories. My name is Marcus, and 3 years ago, I believed I had discovered paradise, following 20 years in military logistics and a divorce that felt as crushing as being run over by a tank piloted by my ex-wife's lawyer. I came into possession of my grandfather's cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota, with a population of 3,200. The most significant drama there used to be Mrs. Henderson's cat pilfering fish from the neighbor's docks. The cabin itself is nothing extravagant. A 1960s A-frame situated on 2 acres of absolute heaven. Each morning, I would be awakened by the calls of loons across the mirror-like water. I'd step onto dock boards polished as smooth as glass by 4 decades of Minnesota weather and inhale air so pure it made my lungs forget 20 years of Army diesel exhaust. The place had the scent of my childhood, old cedar mixed with pine needles and that distinct, sweet metallic smell of lake water at sunrise. For 2 flawless years, Lake Serenity lived up to its name. There were 47 properties dispersed around 8 miles of shoreline, a blend of blue-collar locals and seasonal residents, all adhering to one sacred principle. Wave when you pass, lend a hand when needed, and stay out of each other's business the rest of the time. Then, Hurricane Brenda made landfall. She had acquired the most prominent eyesore on the lake, an $800,000 McMansion that looked as though a suburban Dallas home had been accidentally dropped into the Minnesota wilderness in her first week. She made her rounds to half the lake residents by pontoon boat, perpetually dressed in blindingly white capris and cardigans so bright they could be used to signal aircraft. She was as sweet as artificial sweetener on the surface, but her eyes were as cold as the lake ice in January, the morning that everything shifted. I was on my dock with a coffee that tasted like liquid serenity when I heard the deep growl of an overpowered pontoon boat slicing through the morning's quiet like a chainsaw through silk. "Yoo-hoo! Hello there, neighbor." Brenda's voice echoed across the water with all the friendliness of a tax audit. She maneuvered up to my dock with a smile that would have made a used car salesman envious. "I'm Brenda Carmichael, from the executive estate just across the way." "Executive estate? Good grief. I'm here on official HOA business," she declared, pulling out a manila folder with the dramatic flair of a game show host unveiling a prize. "The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association has approved updated aesthetic standards, and I regret to inform you that your rustic arrangement is not compliant with our community guidelines." I placed my coffee mug down with such force it clanged against the wooden rail like a bell. "What homeowners association?" Her manufactured smile fractured just enough to reveal her teeth. "The one that safeguards our property values from deteriorating influences. That aluminum boat needs to go. And honestly, the fishing equipment scattered about makes the entire area look as if a bait shop exploded." My deteriorating influence was a 1995 Lund that had landed more fish than her luxurious floating living room ever would. The scattered fishing gear consisted of my grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box that was older than she was. "Ma'am, this property has been in my family since before you were born. There is no HOA covenant on my deed, and there most certainly never will be." The facade dropped entirely. Her voice descended to an Arctic chill. "We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy?" She revved that pontoon engine as if she were escaping a crime scene, creating a wake that struck my dock hard enough to make me spill my coffee. The lingering smell of burning fuel and expensive perfume hung in the morning air like a threat. mingling with the clean scent of pine until it made my stomach churn. As I observed her mansion's windows glinting in the sunrise like the eyes of a predator, an old military instinct surfaced, the one that had kept me alive through 3 deployments. This was not merely a neighborly disagreement. This was war, and I had the distinct, sinking feeling that I had just been conscripted. 3 days later, I discovered an envelope affixed to my front door, looking like a parking citation from hell. Inside was the most creative work of fiction I had encountered since my ex-wife's divorce settlement claims. Lake Serenity Homeowners Association violation notice was emblazoned across premium letterhead in blood-red ink. It seemed I owed them $500 for failing to uphold dock aesthetic standards, and was given 30 days to comply or risk further fines and possible property liens. The document appeared impressive, with official-looking seals, case numbers, and legalistic jargon that would cause most people to panic and write a check. Unfortunately for them, it was worth less than the paper it was printed on. But the average person wouldn't realize that it was time for some reconnaissance. The basement of the Cedar Falls courthouse smelled of old leather and broken dreams, where dust motes danced in the fluorescent lighting like tiny specters of bureaucratic nightmares. I had learned during my time in the Army that the most valuable intelligence comes from individuals who have been filing paperwork longer than you've been alive. Thus, I befriended Dolores, the county clerk in her 70s. "Another HOA victim, dear?" she whispered, retrieving my property file with hands that trembled slightly from arthritis. "That Carmichael woman has been in here 6 times this month inquiring about enforcement protocols and lien authority. Just between us, honey, she doesn't know the first thing about property law." My deed was perfectly clear. No covenants, no restrictions, and 0 HOA authority. But this is where my old logistics training came into play. You must always verify what your adversary is actually doing while they distract you with theatrical paperwork. Brenda's Lake Serenity Homeowners Association did exist, having been incorporated 18 months prior with a grand total of 12 members out of the 47 lake properties. Legally speaking, they possessed about as much power over my property as my neighbor's cat. However, while cross-checking ownership records, something set off alarm bells. Several lakefront properties had recently been transferred to a Carmichael Holdings LLC. A brief online investigation uncovered the truth. Our self-proclaimed HOA queen was operating an unlicensed vacation rental empire, converting quiet family cabins into party destinations for tourists from the Twin Cities. The very woman lecturing me on community standards was the one actively destroying them. I was reminded of something my grandfather used to say: "Before you take on City Hall, you better be sure who really runs the city." He was a wise man. He also taught me that most county records, property ownership, business licenses, covenant restrictions, are public information, all available online for free. It's remarkable what one can discover by doing their homework instead of just making threats. Armed with this information, I chose to gauge community opinion with some strategic social media reconnaissance. Facebook may be where brain cells go to perish, but it's also where you find out who's truly paying attention in your local area. My post was straightforward. "Has anyone else received violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? Asking for educational purposes." My phone lit up like a fireworks display. 8 different lake residents sent me private messages, each sharing their own Brenda horror story. She had been systematically moving around the lake like a tornado of legal intimidation, menacing elderly widows over bird feeders and young families over the color of their mailboxes. Janet, a retired librarian with organizational skills that would make the CIA weep, had been meticulously documenting everything in a 3-ring binder. Tom from the marina contributed photos of Brenda's bounce checks and unpaid fuel bills. Even 90-year-old Florence added her observations about unusual late-night comings and goings at Brenda's supposed family rentals. I established a private group chat named the Lake Serenity Truth Squad, because if you're going to combat insanity, you might as well embrace the comic book-style drama. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like honey mixed with a potent solvent. "Marcus, sweetie, I saw your precious little Facebook post. You're making this much harder on yourself than it needs to be. Just asking questions, Brenda. Simple neighborly curiosity. Oh, honey, you truly don't want to travel down this path with me." Her voice dropped to that unique pitch women use just before they're about to ruin your credit score. "I possess connections you can't even fathom, and I will not hesitate to report you to the proper authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone. contemplating what sort of connections a vacation rental scammer imagined she had with local law enforcement. As twilight descended over the lake, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle rhythm of waves against the aged wood, breathing in air that still smelled of freedom and fish fries. The sunset painted the scene in gold, including the houses of the Truth Squad members scattered around the shoreline like illuminated fortresses. Brenda had made one crucial error. She had initiated a fight with someone who understood how to gather intelligence before engaging in battle. If Brenda believed a bit of Facebook drama would deter me, she clearly hadn't done her research on military veterans. We don't back down, we adapt, improvise, and sometimes overanalyze every detail until 3:00 a.m. while devising 17 different combat strategies. Tuesday morning ushered in an unexpected guest, Tom Hendris from County Code Enforcement. Looking as cheerful as a man about to undergo a root canal, steered his pickup truck across my gravel driveway at precisely 9:00 a.m. because Brenda, it seemed, valued punctuality when lodging baseless complaints. "Mr. Marcus, sorry to trouble you, but I need to investigate some reports concerning dock violations and an abandoned vehicle." Tom appeared mortified, which spoke volumes about the merit of Brenda's allegations. I poured him a cup of coffee that actually tasted like coffee, unlike the battery acid served at government buildings, and we strolled down to inspect my supposedly illegal dock arrangement. Tom measured everything twice, consulted his clipboard, and then shook his head like a man who had just squandered his morning on trivial matters. "Between us," he said, lowering his voice despite our being alone, "this is the 23rd complaint I've received from that same address in 6 months. The lady has the county office on speed dial." It was then that Tom divulged something intriguing. Brenda had actually tried to hand him a $100 bill during their last interaction, calling it a consulting fee for discovering creative interpretations of building codes. This woman wasn't just acting like a neighborhood tyrant. She was probing the limits of small-time corruption. My grandfather always said, "You can assess people by how they treat service workers and public employees." Evidently, Brenda's approach was to either bully them or bribe them. That evening, the Truth Squad attended Brenda's emergency HOA meeting as observers, an event that was about as democratic as an election in North Korea. The meeting was held in her mansion's great room, a space so ostentatiously decorated it looked like a furniture store had exploded in various shades of beige and gold. Only 6 individuals attended, primarily property managers from her rental empire who looked as though they would rather be anywhere else. Brenda had crafted an elaborate PowerPoint presentation titled, "Protecting Our Community Investment," featuring pie charts on property values and photos of non-compliant properties, which, coincidentally, all belonged to people who had declined to join her HOA. Janet, bless her librarian soul, took notes as if she were documenting war crimes. But the most valuable intelligence was gathered when she observed Brenda repeatedly checking an expensive Rolex and casting nervous glances toward the kitchen during the bathroom break. Because nothing says professional gathering like a bathroom break in someone's home, Janet followed Brenda and overheard a tense phone call. "I told you the payments are on their way." Brenda hissed into her phone. "These people are proving more obstinate than we anticipated, but I have new strategies, legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever is necessary." The pieces began to fall into place like a puzzle composed of red flags. This wasn't about community standards or property values. Someone was exerting financial pressure on Brenda, and she was frantically attempting to generate revenue through harassment and intimidation. I had witnessed this pattern before in the Army. Individuals under immense stress make increasingly desperate choices until they cross lines they never imagined they would. The question was, who held Brenda's financial reins? The answer arrived sooner than I expected. While investigating her lawyer, the same one who had sent me that threatening cease and desist letter, I found that he specialized in foreclosure defense and debt collection. Not the type of attorney one hires for neighborhood disagreements, unless one is already submerged in legal troubles. So, I did what any logical person would do. I filed my own complaint against Brenda for harassment, filing false reports, and misusing county resources for personal vendettas. Two could play the bureaucracy game, and I had ample experience navigating military red tape. Then, I went a step further, using the property management company's contact details from the rental listings. I contacted the actual owner of Brenda's mansion. It turned out that Northwood's property management was extremely interested to learn about their tenant's creative interpretation of the lease agreement and her unauthorized business dealings. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez who had been monitoring the pattern of complaints from our lake, pulled me aside after I submitted my counter. "Complaint, unofficially," he said, leaning against his patrol car as the evening light glinted on the lake like scattered diamonds. "We've been documenting everything, nothing criminal so far, but she's treading a very fine line, and we are watching." That night, sitting on my dock with the gentle lapping of waves mixing with distant laughter from a genuine family barbecue across the lake, I realized Brenda had made a fundamental tactical blunder. She had assumed everyone would simply capitulate like frightened civilians. Instead, she had inadvertently unified a community that had been quietly going about its business for decades. The scent of charcoal and honest conversation drifted across the water, blending with the pine-scented evening air that still felt like home. Tomorrow would bring new conflicts, but tonight, the good guys were winning. If Brenda considered code enforcement her ultimate weapon, she clearly hadn't advanced to the actual weapons of mass bureaucratic destruction yet. That distinction was reserved for what transpired at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning that began peacefully and then deteriorated faster than a greased pig at a county fair. I was in the midst of my morning coffee ritual, that sacred first sip that convinces you the world might not be entirely mad, when the distinct crunch of police car tires on gravel shattered the lake's morning serenity. Blue lights flashed across my cabin walls like a bizarre aurora borealis, and I could almost feel Brenda's sense of satisfaction radiating from her mansion deck across the water. Two officers emerged from their cruiser, looking about as enthusiastic as mall security guards summoned to disperse a senior citizen flash mob. The younger officer possessed the fresh-faced sincerity of someone who still thought every 911 call was a legitimate crisis. His partner, a grizzled veteran with sergeant's stripes and the weary look of a man who had witnessed every form of human folly, clearly sensed this would be another misuse of taxpayer funds. "Mr. Marcus, we've had reports that you are trespassing on private property and have made threatening remarks toward a female resident. I invited them in for coffee because, frankly, if you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well maintain your civility," the senior officer, Sergeant Peterson according to his name tag, accepted with gratitude, likely because he knew government coffee tastes like liquid regret mixed with budget deficits. "Sir, we are required to respond to all calls," Peterson said, easing into my grandfather's old kitchen chair, which groaned like a ship in a storm. "But just between us, this complaint doesn't seem right." That's when I presented my trump card. Documentation, security camera footage, property deeds, a complete timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign, and even Tom, the code enforcement officer's written account of the attempted bribery. I had learned in the Army that paperwork wins wars, and this particular conflict was about to become very lopsided. Peterson watched the footage of my supposed threatening behavior, which depicted me assisting elderly Florence with loading her fishing gear into her car, while Brenda observed from behind her mansion's windows like a villain in a suburban spy thriller. The trespassing took place on a public access road that had been public since before Brenda's birth, despite the brand new private property signs she had put up overnight. Like some kind of legal tooth fairy. "Ma'am," Peterson murmured, shaking his head at the footage, "either you're the world's most courteous terrorist or someone has been playing us for fools." While the officers were examining my evidence, my phone rang. Dave Morrison, a private investigator who worked part-time at the local tackle shop and looked like he could win an arm wrestling match against a bear, had completed the background check I had requested. His findings would have made a soap opera writer weep with professional envy. Brenda Carmichael owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Minneapolis. The irony was so palpable you could slice it with a butter knife and serve it at the county fair. She had been sued by that HOA and had lost, which accounted for her extensive knowledge of legal intimidation methods. More troublingly, she owed money to everyone from contractors to credit card companies, with a history of using legal threats to postpone payments until creditors either gave up or settled for a fraction of the amount. But here is where things got truly interesting. Dave had found that Brenda's rental business violated 3 separate zoning ordinances, none of which required the business licenses she had never bothered to acquire. The county had no record of her vacation rental enterprise, meaning she had been operating illegally while lecturing others about community standards. The Truth Squad had expanded to 15 lake residents, each with their own Brenda horror story. Tom at the marina disclosed that she owed $3,200 in dock fees and had threatened to sue him for discrimination when he requested payment. The hardware store owner provided security footage of Brenda ordering supplies, then contesting the charges with her credit card company, asserting that the materials were defective, though she never returned them. The pattern was as clear as the lake water on a calm day. Brenda employed legal intimidation to evade paying legitimate debts, hoping people would rather absorb the loss than challenge her in court. Peterson concluded his review of my documentation and shook his head like a man who had just realized he'd been on a wild goose chase. Mr. Marcus, I strongly advise you to consider pressing charges for filing false police reports. This woman has been using us as her personal enforcement agency, and that practice ends today. As the officers departed, their tires crunching on the gravel that now sounded like victory, I saw Brenda's silhouette vanish from her mansion window. The morning mist was lifting from the lake, carrying with it the clean scent of pine and potential. My attorney had set a meeting for the following morning, stating he had information that would alter everything. Something in his tone suggested Brenda's house of cards was about to topple in a way she could never have anticipated. The loons called across the water, their haunting melody blending with the distant sounds of normal people beginning their day without resorting to lawsuits or bribing public officials. Arthur Peton had been my grandfather's attorney since the Carter administration, and at 78, he still dressed as if he were arguing cases before the Supreme Court. His office smelled of aged leather and fine cigars, with law books stacked so high they seemed poised to collapse and entomb unsuspecting clients in centuries of legal history. "Marcus, you may want to take a seat for this," Arthur said, adjusting the wire-rimmed glasses that had likely seen the signing of the Constitution. "I've been re-examining your grandfather's estate more thoroughly, and there's something we overlooked." He laid out documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player displaying a royal flush. Property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all with signatures and dates I had never seen. "When your grandfather passed, you inherited more than just the cabin," Arthur went on, his voice adopting the measured tone lawyers use when they are about to deliver a bombshell. "In 1987, he established the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now hold a 60% controlling interest in a trust that owns 4 lakefront properties." My coffee mug paused midway to my mouth, for properties, one of which was the $800,000 mansion currently inhabited by a certain Brenda Carmichael. The revelation hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I had been battling my own tenant without realizing it. For 3 years, Brenda had been remitting rent to a property management company that deposited her payments into an account I was unaware of. The woman who had been harassing me about property standards was, in fact, putting money into my pocket each month. Arthur produced a lease agreement thick enough to stop a bullet. "Your grandfather was meticulous. This lease contains clauses regarding the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, a ban on unlicensed business activities, and the maintenance of community harmony. Ms. Carmichael has breached approximately 14 different terms." The irony was so exquisite it felt like an act of divine intervention. Brenda had been harassing her own landlord while also falling behind on her rent, running illegal businesses in violation of her lease, and systematically disrupting other tenants within the same property trust. "How far behind is she on rent?" I inquired, although I had a strong suspicion I already knew the answer. 2 months, with late fees accruing. The property management company was actually in the process of initiating eviction proceedings, but they require the trust's approval, which, by the way, is you. I stared at the papers, my mind rapidly processing 3 years of deposited payments that I had assumed were from some obscure inheritance account. Brenda's desperate actions suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just contending with harassment complaints and zoning violations. She was on the brink of losing the central hub of her entire rental operation. "Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she?" His weathered face broke into a smile that would have been at home in a courtroom victory photograph. "Not unless she is significantly more intelligent than her recent actions would indicate." The strategic possibilities struck me like a tactical epiphany. I could evict Brenda immediately for her lease violations, but that seemed like a victory on a technicality rather than a matter of justice. My grandfather had always taught me that true power lies in knowing when not to exercise it. "What do you recommend?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, which groaned like the old timbers of a ship in a storm. "Give her one last chance to rectify this, document everything, propose mediation, demonstrate that you attempted to resolve the situation reasonably. The courts look favorably upon landlords who explore all diplomatic avenues before resorting to the nuclear option." But if she were to escalate further, Arthur tapped the eviction notice he had already drafted. 30 days to vacate due to multiple lease Violations? Clean, legal, and utterly catastrophic to her financial house of cards. I departed from Arthur's office feeling as though I had just discovered I had been playing chess while everyone else believed we were playing checkers. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow on Main Street, and for the first time in months, I felt that the universe might indeed have a sense of humor. Brenda Carmichael, the HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst adversary to allow her to disrupt his peace and quiet. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is realizing you've been holding all the cards from the very start. You know that feeling when you're putting together IKEA furniture and suddenly discover you've had the instruction manual upside down for 3 hours? That's precisely how I felt leaving Arthur's office, except, instead of a wobbly bookshelf, I had unintentionally become the landlord to my greatest nemesis. It was time to construct a case that would make Perry Mason weep with professional admiration. Arthur took on the role of my strategic advisor, pouring decades of courtroom experience into what he dubbed the nuclear option playbook. His office became a mission control center, with manila folders fanned out across every available surface. Like a legal form of kudzu, this man had been filing documents since Nixon was in office, and he tackled this case with the methodical precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Consider landlord-tenant law as coaching a football team, Arthur elucidated, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a yellow legal pad. You establish clear rules, the players either adhere to them or are permanently benched. No personal emotions, just consequences for documented breaches. Dave Morrison, my private investigator who could likely trail a ghost through a blizzard, presented his final report with the gratified look of someone who had discovered gold in another person's backyard. Brenda owed $73,000 to various creditors, had tax liens on her former Minneapolis property, and possessed a credit score that made subprime mortgages seem like a good investment. Here is something your audience should be aware of, Dave said, sliding documents across Arthur's desk. In most counties, you can search public records online for anyone's property liens, judgments, and tax problems. Knowledge is power in these disputes, and most of this information can be found for free with just a little time. Janet, the retired librarian turned intelligence analyst, had coordinated the community documentation project with an efficiency that would bring a tear to the eye. Of the Pentagon, her 3-ring binder was filled with time-stamped photographs, witness statements, and a cross-referenced index of Brenda's harassment incidents that read like a criminal psychology textbook. The marina owner supplied receipts for unpaid bills and photocopies of bounced checks. Janet reported, adjusting the reading glasses that had witnessed more neighborhood drama than a soap opera writer's wildest dreams. Local contractors shared similar tales of payment disputes followed by legal threats. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez, who had been tracking the complaint patterns with the tenacity of a bloodhound on the scent of bacon, offered guidance that balanced on the line between official protocol and friendly counsel. Document everything, he stressed, leaning against Arthur's filing cabinet. Courts want to see that reasonable individuals attempted reasonable solutions before the situation escalated. The technical preparations felt akin to planning a military operation if military operations involved elderly librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the demise of vacation rental empires. I installed additional security cameras with audio recording capabilities because my property, it seemed, had become more heavily surveilled than a federal courthouse. Security cameras with audio can legally record on your own property in most states, Arthur observed, consulting a book thick enough to stop small arms fire. Always check local statutes first, but documented evidence always trumps, he said. She said, we devised what Arthur termed the escalation protocol, a step-by-step strategy that would provide Brenda with every chance to save face while simultaneously documenting her refusal to act reasonably. First, I would approach her as a concerned neighbor, suggesting mediation through county community services. If she declined or escalated the situation, we would reveal the landlord-tenant relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. Janet studied Robert's Rules of Order as if she were preparing for a Senate confirmation hearing. While Arthur drafted legal notice templates for every conceivable outcome, the man had contingency plans for his contingency plans, including backup strategies that ranged from zoning enforcement to potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. Always provide someone with a face-saving exit from a conflict, Arthur advised, organizing documents with the precision of a medieval monk illuminating a manuscript. Courts admire parties who have attempted a reasonable resolution, and juries detest bullies who reject reasonable offers. The Truth Squad had transformed into a neighborhood watch program that would make the NSA envious. 15 Lake residents coordinated through our group chat, sharing real-time information on Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. Tom at the marina consented to document any future incidents, while local businesses pledged to support our paper trail with their own records of harassment. We even compiled a list of media contacts in case the situation garnered public interest. The editor of the local newspaper had already shown curiosity about the lake dispute, particularly after hearing rumors of bribery attempts and zoning violations. The community protection element felt like something from a feel-good film, but with more legal paperwork and fewer song and dance numbers. Several elderly neighbors installed security cameras following Brenda's intimidation tactics, while Truth Squad members began to accompany vulnerable residents on errands to prevent isolated confrontations. As I sat in Arthur's office that evening, surrounded by evidence folders and strategic planning charts, the scent of old law books mingling with Janet's homemade cookies and the faint aroma of Dave's cigar smoke, I realized we had inadvertently forged something beautiful. A community that would not be bullied. Tomorrow, I would offer Brenda one final opportunity to choose dignity over destruction. After that, the nuclear option was armed and ready. If Brenda believed my growing community support was merely neighborly gossip, she clearly hadn't been assessing the tactical situation unfolding around her. What transpired next demonstrated that desperate individuals make spectacularly foolish choices, especially when cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage began discreetly, which should have been my initial clue that Brenda had escalated from amateur-level harassment to actual criminal activity. She had been monitoring our Truth Squad's actions through a level of Facebook stalking that would make a teenage ex-girlfriend seem casual, creating fake profiles to gather intelligence and propagate counter-narratives about my supposed instability. On Tuesday night, my security cameras recorded something that made my military-grade paranoia look like mild concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle drove slowly past my dock, like a suburban ninja mission gone awry. The driver's face was obscured by a low-pulled baseball cap, but the truck's license plate was perfectly clear under my new LED floodlights. Wednesday morning delivered a surprise that would have ruined my day had I not learned to anticipate the worst from people who wear too much perfume and carry legal threats. My fishing boat was partially submerged at the dock, resembling a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision. Not loosened, not damaged, just gone. This resulted in $2,800 in water damage to the motor and electronics, plus the loss of tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been on this earth. The smell of lake water mixed with oil and gasoline formed an aromatic cocktail that screamed insurance claim and criminal charges. But this is where Brenda's desperation exposed her fundamental ignorance of how evidence functions in the 21st century. My security cameras had captured the entire event in glorious high-definition detail, complete with audio of her handyman grumbling about crazy lady jobs as he worked. I filed the police report with the methodical precision of someone who had been documenting harassment for months. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived within the hour, took one look at the video evidence, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money go down the drain. "This has crossed a line," Rodriguez stated, inspecting the deliberately removed drain plug. "Property damage constitutes a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone place this in serious criminal territory." While I was occupied with insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently having her own version of a nervous breakdown across the lake. Members of the Truth Squad reported increasingly erratic behavior that made her previous harassment seem like polite discourse. She had begun approaching elderly neighbors with the subtlety of a door-to-door cult recruiter, insisting they choose sides in what she dramatically called the lake war. Florence, bless her 90-year-old heart, informed Brenda exactly where she could shove her loyalty demands, using language that would make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned Brenda from the fuel dock after she berated a teenage employee about conspiracy pricing and discrimination against successful businesswomen. The kid was earning $8 an hour and likely couldn't spell conspiracy, much less orchestrate one against a vacation rental queen. The grocery store incident became a local legend within 24 hours. Brenda had a complete meltdown in the checkout line, accusing the cashier of overcharging her and demanding to speak with corporate headquarters about the systematic harassment of professional women. the manager, a patient woman who had dealt with everything from coupon fraud to holiday shopping chaos, asked Brenda to leave after she began filming other customers while yelling about needing witnesses to the discrimination. But the real intelligence treasure trove came from Janet's library research skills, which had unearthed Brenda's residential history spanning the last 8 years. The pattern was identical at every previous address. Neighbor disputes escalating to harassment complaints, accusations of unstable and dangerous behavior directed at anyone who challenged her, and an eventual departure under circumstances that suggested legal pressure. Previous landlords described identical patterns of escalation that concluded with eviction proceedings. One Minneapolis property manager had documented a restraining order after Brenda threatened to harm a neighbor who complained about her unlicensed dog breeding operation. Another apartment complex had security footage of her keying the cars of residents who had reported noise violations. Meanwhile, my quiet preparations intensified like a military operation nearing D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order, documenting the property damage and the pattern of harassment. We coordinated with the insurance investigator regarding potential fraud charges, as Brenda's handyman had conveniently developed amnesia about his late-night visits to the marina. The pressure was mounting from multiple directions. Online reviews for Brenda's vacation rentals began to mention unstable management and neighborhood disputes, causing her booking rates to plummet faster than her credit score. The property management company received formal complaints about tenant behavior that violated community standards. County zoning enforcement had initiated their formal investigation into her unlicensed business operations, while the editors of the local newspaper started asking uncomfortable questions about allegations of corruption and harassment. As I sat on my repaired dock that evening, listening to the gentle splash of waves against new bumpers and breathing in air that smelled like victory mixed with pine needles, I realized Brenda had made one final tactical misstep. She had transformed her criminal behavior into documented evidence that would utterly destroy her in any court of law. When desperate people exhaust their legal options, they typically do one of two things: accept defeat with grace or double down on foolishness until they achieve legendary status. Brenda, being Brenda, chose door number 2 with the zeal of a kamikaze pilot aiming for an aircraft carrier. What happened next would have been comical if it weren't so pathetically criminal. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had served Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, which made Brenda's approach about as welcome as a tornado at a church social. According to Bill's subsequent testimony, she strode into his office on a Tuesday morning, carrying a designer handbag and the sort of confidence that comes from being high on your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposal that could be mutually beneficial," Brenda had declared, sliding in, envelope across his desk as if she were purchasing state secrets rather than attempting to bribe a small-town politician who likely earned less than her monthly shoe budget. It contained $5,000 in cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard that was my property. She actually used air quotes while suggesting that my grandfather's cabin should be condemned as a threat to the lake's water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption when it walked into his office wearing white capris and the perfume of desperation. He immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office, setting in motion an investigation that would make Watergate look like a minor parking dispute. But Brenda wasn't done peddling her criminal services around town like some sort of door-to-door corruption salesperson. She made similar overtures to the zoning inspector and even tried to bribe a sheriff's deputy with what she termed a community safety donation in exchange for overlooking her minor business license oversights. The zoning inspector, a by-the-book man named Carl who treated building codes like sacred texts, actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The audio quality was so crisp you could hear Brenda's jewelry clinking as she counted out the bills while explaining how Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be removed for the sake of community safety. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez documented her bribery attempt in an official report that read like a criminal justice textbook example of how not to influence public officials. The woman had managed to escalate a neighborhood squabble into a federal case faster than one could say, conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with the news of the DA's investigation, his voice had that particular tone lawyers use when they're trying not to sound overly pleased about their client's vindication. "Marcus, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony that comes with serious consequences." I felt a conflict that my military training hadn't prepared me for. I had sought justice, not to witness someone's life implode in real time, But Brenda had crossed lines that transformed neighborly disputes into criminal acts, and there was no reversing that. The editor of the local newspaper, who had been following the story with the persistence of a bloodhound on a bacon trail, contacted me for an interview. "This has escalated beyond a neighborhood issue," she explained. "Allegations of public corruption are newsworthy, and the community has a right to know what's going on." The media attention precipitated Brenda's final public meltdown, which took place at the boat launch in front of 27 witnesses who likely thought they were just there to launch their fishing boats, not to watch a daytime drama unfold in real time. "This is all a conspiracy," Brenda shrieked, pointing at me with enough vitriol to kill small wildlife. "He's been stalking and terrorizing me for months. I demand he pay for my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so absurd that several witnesses actually laughed out loud. Florence, who had been loading her fishing gear with the patience of someone who had outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the authority of a person who had earned the right to say exactly what she thought. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, and you're the problem here. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his own business while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." The crowd nodded in agreement like a Greek chorus of common sense. Several people pulled out their phones to record what was clearly destined to become social media gold. Brenda, realizing she had lost all community support, stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers with money she clearly did not possess. That evening, Arthur advised me to publicly reveal the landlord relationship at the upcoming town council meeting. "It's time to put an end to this before she causes more serious harm to herself or someone else," he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. "Her criminal actions have forced your hand." Word spread through the town faster than gossip at a church potluck. The county attorney planned to attend to observe potential witness testimony, while the regional newspaper sent a reporter after hearing about corruption investigations in small-town America. As I sat on my dock that night, listening to the loons call across water that reflected both stars and possibility, I realized Brenda had inadvertently given me something I had never anticipated: the moral high ground in a community that refused to be intimidated. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day in court, or at least in the high school gymnasium. If you have never witnessed 300 small-town residents cram into a high school gymnasium for what was supposed to be a standard town council meeting, you are missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport. The atmosphere felt like a championship basketball game combined with a public execution. Except the popcorn was homemade and the drama was entirely real. Local businesses had closed early, so their owners could attend what everyone was now calling the Great Lake Showdown. A regional TV news crew set up cameras as if they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials occupied the back row with the grim satisfaction of people about to see justice served with a side of public accountability. Brenda made a fashionably late entrance with her high-priced Twin Cities lawyer, a slick-looking man in a $1,000 suit who likely billed more per hour than most people in the room earned in a week. She was dressed for combat in a white power suit that declared, "I'm important." While her nervous energy betrayed that she knew the walls were closing in faster than her credit card payments were due, I stepped up to the podium feeling more composed than I had in months, holding a manila folder filled with enough documentation to sink a battleship. The gymnasium quieted down, the only sounds being the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of someone's stomach. "Apparently, democracy works up an appetite. Thank you all for attending tonight," I began, looking out at the faces I had come to know as neighbors over the past few months. 3 months ago, I believed I was involved in a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I want to share what I have actually uncovered. Arthur had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with envy. Property ownership documents were projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen in letters large enough to be read from the parking lot. The audience gasped collectively when the truth was revealed. A sound like 300 people all realizing at once they had been watching a magic trick performed in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 3 years, I have been Brenda Carmichael's landlord without my knowledge." The gymnasium erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Applause, laughter, and a chorus of "I knew it" echoed off the basketball hoops as Brenda's face cycled through more colors than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations unfolded like a greatest hits collection of tenant nightmares. Security camera footage of the boat sabotage elicited audible boos from the crowd, while audio recordings of her bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter and begin taking notes that looked suspiciously like arrest warrants. Brenda's lawyer tried to perform damage control with the desperation of someone attempting to plug a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to protect community standards. The audience's laughter was so thunderous it probably registered on seismic equipment in the next county. Florence, seated in the front row with the confidence of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power, shouted, "Good faith, my ass!" loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears and the newspaper reporter scribble furiously. Financial records detailing unpaid bills and fraudulent business activities scrolled across the screen like a criminal psychology textbook written in spreadsheet form. Local business owners openly discussed Brenda's creative payment avoidance tactics, while Tom from the marina held up photocopies of bounced checks as if they were evidence in a fraud trial. That's when I delivered the line I had rehearsed in my bathroom mirror for 3 days. "Ms. Carmichael, I offered you respect as a neighbor and a reasonable discussion as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal behavior instead. I held up the official eviction notice, crisp, legal, and utterly devastating. As your landlord, I am giving you 30 days notice to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have all been handled privately and respectfully." The standing ovation was so prolonged, I thought the fire marshal might issue a noise citation. Florence led the applause like a conductor, directing the world's most enthusiastic orchestra, while several members of the Truth Squad wiped away tears that could have been joy, relief, or a combination of both. Brenda rose with the dramatic flair of someone who had clearly been practicing courtroom scenes in her own bathroom mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she yelled, pointing at me with enough venom to poison a small lake. "He has bought off law enforcement and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez moved closer as Brenda's voice rose beyond acceptable indoor levels. Her lawyer had to physically restrain her from advancing toward the podium, likely saving her from additional criminal charges for public disturbance and potential assault. The TV reporter interviewed me afterward with questions that felt like softballs from a sympathetic grandmother. "What message do you have for others dealing with HOA abuse? Document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies only triumph when good people remain silent." The next day's newspaper headline read, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme." And just like that, our little neighborhood drama became a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of carefully reading your property deeds. As the crowd left that night, chattering like excited teenagers after a concert, I realized we had unintentionally created something beautiful. A community that refused to be intimidated by anyone, regardless of how loudly they proclaimed their importance. Brenda disappeared from Lake Serenity faster than a bad check bounces, packing her designer luggage and wounded pride into a U-Haul bound for Florida within 14 days. She left behind a forwarding address that was unlikely to be valid for more than 6 months and property damage that resembled a fraternity house after spring break. The criminal case concluded with small-town swiftness. Brenda accepted a plea deal that included probation and 200 hours of community service. An ironic sentence for someone who had spent months terrorizing her actual community. Her high-priced lawyer probably billed more for the plea negotiation than most people earn in a year, but at least justice was served with a side of financial repercussions. I never intended to become Cedar Falls' accidental community organizer, but it seems that defending your fishing rights qualifies you for leadership roles you never sought. The Lake Serenity Advisory Committee grew naturally out of our Truth Squad, establishing reasonable community standards without the authoritarian tendencies that often plague traditional HOAs. We collaborated with county environmental agencies on lake conservation, developed a neighborhood watch program that targeted actual crime instead of unapproved bird feeders, and set up mediation services for disputes that didn't warrant lawyers or criminal investigations. The real magic occurred when I figured out how to invest 3 years of unexpected rental income. The Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund was launched with a novel idea: to reward local kids who understood community service rather than community harassment. Each spring, we grant scholarships to students pursuing careers in environmental science, law, or public service. Our annual fundraiser has become the premier social event in Cedar Falls, featuring a fish fry that tastes like heaven, live bluegrass music, and storytelling contests where neighbors share Remember Brenda tales with the kind of affection usually reserved for surviving natural disasters. Florence won last year's competition with her Oscar-worthy reenactment of telling Brenda precisely where to stick her loyalty demands, complete with gestures that made volunteer firefighters blush and inspired the Methodist minister's sermon on righteous anger serving divine justice. Personal healing came like a Minnesota spring, slowly, then all at once, restoring life to places I had forgotten could flourish. The peace I had initially been searching for arrived with unexpected benefits. Genuine friendships forged in the fires of community resistance and neighbors who had demonstrated they would stand together when bullies attempted to divide them. Janet and I began dating around Christmas, discovering a shared appreciation for proper documentation and her remarkable talent. For organizing neighborhood revolutions, it turns out librarians make excellent partners when they're not busy toppling vacation rental empires with their superior research skills. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, constructing picnic tables for public lake access points and teaching local kids how to build useful things instead of filing frivolous lawsuits. There is a deep satisfaction in creating something beautiful from raw materials, especially after months of dealing with people who manufacture chaos from pure entitlement. Our lake conservation initiative became a statewide model for community environmental stewardship. Weekend cleanup events remove invasive species, while elementary school students monitor water quality and learn that protecting nature depends on cooperation, not litigation. State agencies now feature Lake Serenity as proof that communities can achieve remarkable things when they collaborate. Here are 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner should know. First, investigate deed restrictions. Before purchasing property, many HOA rules are unenforceable fantasies concocted by individuals with law degrees from Google University. Second, public record searches can reveal anyone's liens, judgments, and business licenses through county websites for free. Knowledge always trumps intimidation. Third, security cameras and thorough documentation are more effective against harassment than any lawyer. So, invest in quality equipment and understand your local recording laws. The media coverage transformed our neighborhood drama into an inspiration for communities across the country battling HOA tyranny. I have been featured on property rights podcasts, spoken at municipal meetings about harassment prevention, and somehow become the unlikely advocate for citizens who refuse to yield to bureaucratic bullying. Last week, Janet mentioned her sister's struggle with predatory towing companies that target vulnerable drivers in Duluth. Same intimidation tactics. She said, presenting documentation that set off my well-honed bullying detection radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring my morning coffee that tasted of victory and possibility. Dave Morrison's investigative services are still available. This morning, watching the sunrise paint Lake Serenity golden while loons call across the tranquil water, I hear my grandfather's wisdom echoing through time. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. The scent of pine needles mingles with fresh coffee and the promise of another day in a community that learned to fight back against those who confuse authority with a license to abuse others. If you've endured your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. Together, we can empower others to fight these battles and win. And if you enjoyed seeing justice prevail over entitlement with a generous portion of poetic karma, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for End for HOA, where ordinary people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants ruin their peace. Thanks for joining us on End for HOA, where the HOA Karens finally meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, please like the video, leave a comment with your reaction, and subscribe so you'll be ready for the next wild HOA tale.